Right, let's dive in today. We're going to be looking at this lecture.
Okay.
It's by an economics professor
hmm
who had some pretty pointed things to say about the American empire,
Right.
specifically about its decline.
Yeah, it's the global economic landscape anticipating a potential Trump presidency, right?
Exactly.
It's quite a read.
Yeah, and, you know, he delivered this lecture sometime before a possible second Trump presidency.
Right.
And I think some of his takes are, well, I think they're pretty interesting. I mean, at least they got me thinking.
It's fascinating how frank he is. He doesn't really shy away from these uncomfortable truths about America's position in the world. I mean, he really challenges this whole idea of American exceptionalism.
Yeah, he does. And he even goes as far as to say that America has lost like over 75% of its manufacturing jobs since the 1970s.
Right.
And he points to that as like a really clear indicator of declining economic dominance.
Yeah, and he connects that decline to the rise of these other global powers, right? Specifically, he talks about the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Yeah.
And he really emphasizes that the BRICS now, they account for a much larger percentage of the world's population and
Uh-huh.
economic output than the G7, the US and its major allies.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant shift.
Yeah.
It's like I don't know, it's like when you realize, that rookie player on the team is suddenly the MVP.
Yeah, exactly. It shifts the balance of power,
Yeah.
and to kind of illustrate that shift, he tells this anecdote about Indonesia joining the BRICS.
Oh, interesting.
And that's a big deal. It's a real signal that, a lot of countries are moving away from those traditional Western alliances.
Right, right. And speaking of shifting powers, he also brought up the issue of tariffs
Yeah.
and kind of their unintended consequences.
hmm
He specifically talked about BYD, the Chinese electric vehicle company.
Oh, yeah. BYD. They're doing some really interesting things. They're making these, high quality, affordable electric cars.
Okay.
Like their electric SUV, the Tang. It has a range of over 300 miles on a single charge.
What?
But you rarely see them on American roads, right? And that's because of the tariffs that were, imposed by both the Trump and Biden administrations.
So, okay, I mean, tariffs are meant to protect American companies, right?
Right.
But wouldn't that also end up hurting American consumers?
Uh-huh.
I mean, in the long run?
That's exactly the point he's making. He argues that while these tariffs, they might seem to be protecting American companies,
Right.
ultimately they end up hurting American consumers
Uh-huh.
because, consumers end up paying more for goods.
Right.
They have fewer choices.
Yeah.
And it also puts other American businesses at a disadvantage because, they rely on those cheaper goods to stay competitive.
So it's not just a simple question of tariffs being good or bad. There's a lot more nuance there.
Ex-
But it sounds like he's saying, a lot of that economic burden falls on the shoulders of everyday Americans.
He absolutely does. He argues that that the economic and political elite, they often try to offload the burdens of decline onto the working class.
Okay. And how is that done? What's he talking about specifically?
Yeah.
Like policies, actions?
Well, he points to things like the weakening of unions. That reduces the bargaining power of workers. He talks about how inflation has been outpacing wage growth for years now, meaning people's paychecks just aren't keeping up with the rising cost of living.
Right, right.
And then he also mentions how raising interest rates, that can make it much more expensive for people to borrow money, which further squeezes those who are already struggling.
So, I mean, he's painting a pretty stark picture of the challenges facing, the American working class.
Yeah.
Does he offer any alternative solutions to these problems?
He does. He suggests some ideas that, well, they've actually been used successfully in the past, but they're not really talked about much these days, in mainstream economic circles. He brings up examples like wage and price freezes,
Okay.
which were actually implemented by President Nixon to try to combat inflation. And then he talks about rationing during wartime, which, the U.S. government used during World War II to try to make sure that essential goods were distributed fairly.
I mean, wouldn't that be incredibly difficult to implement today,
Yeah.
in our globalized economy?
Yeah, that's a valid point for sure. And he does acknowledge those complexities, but he emphasizes that these alternative approaches, they have been effective
Right.
in certain contexts.
It's not about just dismissing them outright, but maybe having a more open conversation, a more honest conversation
Yeah.
about the potential, the costs and benefits.
That's right.
Now, he also brought up Trump and his presidency.
Right.
How does that tie into all of this?
Well, he connected Trump's success, at least in part, to his ability to tap into this economic anxiety that was felt by the working class. He argued that Trump's, willingness to address these issues head on, even if it was through these unconventional and sometimes controversial means that really resonated with a lot of voters who just felt like they were being ignored by the establishment.
I mean, I get that, but I also think some people would argue that Trump's appeal was rooted in something else entirely.
Oh, for sure.
Like cultural anxieties or maybe even a desire for a strongman leader. I don't know. It just seems like there are a lot of layers to it, and it's hard to pinpoint just one single factor.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment, I think. And the professor actually also mentions Bernie Sanders and suggests that he, also understood the needs of the working class, and offered a different path to addressing them.
I guess you could say that both Trump and Sanders, I mean, despite being on opposite ends of the political spectrum, they were able to connect with voters who felt left behind by the economic changes of the past few decades.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. It really suggests that there's this deep well of discontent out there, and it transcends these traditional political divides.
Yeah.
And maybe it's that discontent that's driving this search for alternative solutions, even if those solutions are radical or they challenge the status quo.
Okay, but how does this all connect to the global picture?
Yeah.
Things like the war in Ukraine.
Right.
What did the professor have to say about that?
That's where things get really, really interesting.
Okay.
So he argued that actions like Trump cutting ties with Netanyahu and Israel, for example, that highlights the shift in global alliances and maybe even this potential for instability.
So it's like that old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what's playing out on a global scale?
I think so, yeah. These traditional alliances, they're being questioned,
Right.
and these new partnerships are emerging.
Yeah.
And he used the war in Ukraine to further illustrate the limitations of American power.
Mm.
He argued that the U.S., they miscalculated their ability to influence the outcome of that conflict.
Okay.
And that the sanctions against Russia, they've largely backfired.
You mean the sanctions that were supposed to cripple the Russian economy?
Exactly.
Okay.
He pointed out that Russia has actually found alternative markets through their BRICS partners.
So it's like trying to plug a hole in a leaky boat and another one just pops open somewhere else.
Right. Exactly.
But wait, he said that the U.S. is unprepared for a war with Russia?
He did, yeah. He argued that the U.S. is ill-equipped for conventional warfare against, powerful adversary like Russia.
But haven't we already learned that lesson from past conflicts? I mean, like Vietnam.
Well, you would think so, wouldn't you? But it seems like maybe the U.S. is kind of stuck in this cycle of repeating past mistakes. I think he's suggesting that the U.S. has gotten so used to fighting these wars against weaker opponents that it's kind of lost sight of what it really takes to win against a truly formidable foe. Okay,
so if the U.S. is declining and the economic elites are profiting at the expense of the working class, and the world is becoming increasingly chaotic, I mean, where's the hope in all of this? Does he offer any solutions?
He does, and they might surprise you. His solutions, they have to do with collective action.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he sees a lot of potential in movements like the labor movement, to really challenge the current economic and political order.
So it's not all doom and gloom. He thinks things can actually change.
Absolutely. Yeah, he even pointed to some recent successes in the labor movement.
Like what?
Like the Amazon labor union and Starbucks workers. They were able to organize successfully.
Right.
And he sees that as a sign that, the labor movement it's gaining momentum.
Yeah, it's definitely encouraging to see those kinds of wins, for sure.
It is.
It sounds like he's saying that, everyday people, when they work together, they actually have the power to shape a better future.
That's exactly it. He even frames the decline of the American empire as a potential opportunity.
Really?
Yeah, for a positive change. Yeah. He believes that If people, if they really recognize their collective power and then actually act on it, then things can shift.
That's a really thought-provoking idea, I think.
Yeah.
It's like he's saying, don't just mourn the loss of the old system, build something better in its place.
Precisely. And he gives these historical examples to support this idea.
Okay.
Remember when he talked about Nixon implementing wage and price freezes?
Right, to combat inflation.
Exactly. Yeah. That was a direct response to public pressure and the threat of social unrest.
Right. And he also mentioned how the U.S. government rationed goods during World War II.
Yeah.
To try to ensure fairness.
Exactly.
That was a pretty big departure from, the free market principles that usually govern the American economy.
Absolutely. I think those examples show that even in a system that really prioritizes individual liberty and free markets, there's always a role for collective action and for government intervention to try to address these societal needs and to ensure some fairness.
But wouldn't some people argue that those are socialist policies?
Well, it depends on how you define socialist, I guess. But, the professor's point is that regardless of the labels, the government can and sometimes should intervene to protect the interests of the majority of people.
So he's advocating for this system that kind of balances individual freedom with a sense of collective responsibility.
I think that's a great way to put it. Yeah, it seems like he's arguing that the future of the U.S. It really hinges on its people and whether they recognize their collective power and then act accordingly.
It's a powerful message for sure, but how can individuals actually make a difference? It all just feels kind of overwhelming, when you think about changing the entire system.
I get that feeling. It is daunting, but remember those examples he gave about the Amazon labor union and the Starbucks workers? Those movements, they started with just a handful of individuals who were willing to stand up and speak out against, unfair working conditions.
So you're saying that even small acts of resistance can have this ripple effect.
I think so, yeah.
And inspire others to take action.
Exactly. And those small actions, they can really build momentum and eventually lead to significant changes. Think about the civil rights movement or the women's suffrage movement.
Huge, yeah.
Yeah, they started with individuals who dared to challenge the status quo and demand a better world.
It is inspiring to think about how those movements, really changed the course of history.
Yeah.
But what about the global picture? How can the U.S. adapt to this world where it's no longer the sole superpower?
That's a great question, and one that probably deserves its own, deep dive. But the professor, he hinted at some potential solutions.
Okay.
He emphasized the importance of really understanding and engaging with the rest of the world, particularly the rising powers in the global South.
So instead of clinging to its, fading dominance, the U.S. needs to learn to cooperate and collaborate with other nations.
Precisely. And that means, recognizing that other countries, they have legitimate interests and perspectives that need to be considered, And it also means rethinking these traditional notions of national security and finding ways to address global challenges like climate change and economic inequality, but through collective action.
So it sounds like the U.S., it really needs to do some serious soul searching.
I think so, yeah.
And figure out what kind of role it wants to play in the 21st century.
Absolutely. And that process, it's going to require this open and honest dialogue, a willingness to challenge assumptions and really a commitment to finding, some common ground.
So in a nutshell, this professor, he's not just offering a bleak assessment of the current, global landscape, but he's also offering a roadmap for how to navigate these challenges.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And create a more just and sustainable future.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. He's really challenging us to move beyond this denial and complacency,
right? And
to embrace the opportunity to build something better.
I don't know about you, but I'm actually starting to feel a little more hopeful.
Yeah, me too.
It's kind of empowering to realize that we're not just, passive bystanders in all of this.
Yeah.
We actually have the power to to shape the narrative.
That's the spirit. And remember, change, it rarely happens overnight.
Yeah.
It's a long process,
Right.
and often messy, but every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory worth celebrating.
So what concrete actions can listeners take?
Yeah.
To actually contribute to positive change? What can they do like right now to make a difference?
That's a great question, and one that we'll explore in more detail in part 3. But for now, I'll just leave you with this. Stay informed,
Okay.
Get involved in your community, support organizations that align with your values, and never underestimate the power of your voice.
I like that. Okay, so stay tuned for part 3, where we'll unpack some practical strategies for actually making a difference,
Right.
and we'll discuss how we can all contribute to building a better future. All right, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into this whole global economic landscape thing. We talked about, the decline of the American empire,
Right.
the challenges that the working class is facing, and this idea of collective action.
Yeah.
So let's get practical now. What can people listening, what can you actually do to make a difference?
Yeah, it's easy to feel overwhelmed by it all,
Right.
But remember, change, it really does start with individuals taking action. You don't have to fix the entire system by yourself.
So baby steps. Right.
Yeah, baby steps.
What are some like small but impactful things that people can actually do?
Well, first off, stay informed.
Okay.
The professor was very clear about, how the media, it often presents a distorted picture. They downplay or ignore certain truths.
Right.
So diversify your news sources.
Okay.
Look for alternative perspectives, and really engage in critical thinking.
So don't just accept everything you read or hear
Exactly.
at face value.
Yeah, question assumptions, look
Yeah.
for evidence, and be open to, to challenging your own beliefs.
Okay, so knowledge is kind of the foundation here.
Yeah.
What's the next step?
Get involved in your community.
Okay.
The professor, he emphasized the power of collective action.
Yeah.
Find some local organizations that are working on issues that you actually care about,
Okay.
whether it's economic justice, environmental protection, social equality, whatever it is.
Oh.
Lend your time, your skills, your resources,
It's like that saying, think globally, act locally.
Yeah,
You can really make a difference, right in your own backyard.
exactly. And don't underestimate the power of your vote.
Right.
The professor highlighted how both Trump and Bernie Sanders, they were able to tap into this deep well of frustration among working class Americans who just felt ignored by the political system.
Yeah.
So make your voice heard at the ballot box.
Okay.
Support candidates who are actually championing policies that promote, economic fairness, social justice, environmental sustainability.
And what if none of the candidates inspire you? What if you just don't, you're not excited about any of them?
Well, then maybe consider running for office yourself.
Oh, wow.
Or at least get involved in local politics.
Okay.
Attend those town hall meetings.
Right.
Write to your representatives,
Yes.
and advocate for the changes you want to see.
So it's really about making your voice heard.
Yeah.
And holding those elected officials accountable.
Exactly. And change, it doesn't always happen through these formal political channels.
Right.
Yeah.
So support organizations and initiatives that align with your values,
Right.
whether it's through, donations, volunteering, or just spreading the word. Your contribution, it can actually make a difference.
It's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Even small actions can create this ripple effect.
Yeah.
And finally, never underestimate the power of your own voice. Talk to your friends, your family, your colleagues about these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Share what you've learned from this deep dive. Spark some conversations that challenge this conventional thinking and inspire others to take action.
So be a catalyst for change.
Exactly.
It is amazing how even just casual conversations, can sometimes lead to really meaningful action.
They can, and change. it rarely happens overnight.
Right.
It takes courage, it takes persistence, and,
Right.
and a willingness to kind of step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah, right.
But as we learn today, we actually have more power than we think.
Yeah.
Especially when we act collectively.
So if you're feeling overwhelmed by, by the state of the world, just remember what we talked about today.
Yeah.
You do have the power to make a difference.
You do.
Find what you're passionate about and get involved.
Yeah, every action, no matter how small, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
And together, I mean, we really can build a better future.
Right.
One that's, more just, more equitable, and more sustainable for everyone.
That's a great note to end on.
It is.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Of course.
We hope you feel inspired to to think critically,
Yeah.
to act courageously, and to really embrace the power of collective action.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for that better world.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for listening, everyone.